All right, cool. We're live. So, thus starts another React series. So, we're going to be starting from kind of the very beginning, from generating your first React app all the way through at the end of the series to having a simple app that makes calls to an external API, posts data to an external API, renders stuff on the page, kind of all the building blocks, certainly that you need for dynos drills, and even for more complex applications as well. We probably will be doing another series after this. That's sort of like the next steps, where everyone attending that will have some baseline React knowledge. But this is going to take you from zero to 60 right now, or 0 to 40 maybe. And as I mentioned, for right now, I just have these objectives in Denver students. I will be pulling these into a README after we generate the app, but for right now, we'll just roll with this. So by the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe single-page applications, generate a React app using the Create React App command line tool, then navigate the basic file structure, kind of understand what's going on, where are the important places to work, where are the files that you can kind of basically ignore and don't need to touch. We'll talk a little bit about some of the benefits of componentization, or breaking your page or your app into these small reusable pieces. And then we'll refactor some existing code, basically the boilerplate that comes with the Create React App script, into components. And this will make more sense as we dive into the actual files themselves. But any questions on our objectives before we get rolling? Also, I know that some of you have been diving into React already. If you are finding at any point like this is not the best use of your time, feel free to work on something else, get up and leave. I won't be offended in any way. You can always dip your toes back in either tomorrow or in the future when we're covering something that's more relevant to where you are. Cool? All right, awesome. So first things first. Can everyone click on this link right here? So we want to talk a little bit about what single page applications are in the first place. So go ahead and click on this link. It's just a Wikipedia entry. And whoops, that's a little big. All I really want you to do for right now, I'm going to put like 3 minutes on the board and read this first part on just kind of describing what single page applications are. And then we'll have some time for group discussion on what they are, why we use them, some of the benefits, stuff like that. So read with a mind towards what they are in the first place and why we bother using them, or what you can surmise about why we would use them based on really just this first paragraph. So let's do 3 minutes to read and to think a little bit, and then we'll have some group discussion. If you're a quick reader and you want to dive into more than the first paragraph there, be my guest. About a minute and a half for reading and thinking. Another minute or so. About 10 seconds or so left to start wrapping up. And I'm going to stop this before it starts beeping. Cool. Did everyone have a chance to dive into that a little bit at least? Okay, sweet. Let's do 2 minutes, so pretty quick. Do a turn and talk with someone near you or next to you, and just kind of talk about like what is a single page app? What are your thoughts based on what you just read, what you know already? Why do we bother using them in the first place if they're introducing complexity, etc. Anyone but on? About 30 more seconds left for discussion. All right, last few seconds. Please wrap up your thoughts. Oh man, I don't have a good place for notes. All right, we'll do this. All right, let's come back together. I don't have my README, which is where I usually take notes. So we're going to makeshift it right now and take notes in Slack. I'm just going to send messages to the ether in my Slack bot. But I'd like to come to some consensus on what is a single page app and why do we care? Why are we bothering to learn this? Why is this so popular right now? So first thing, can I get a volunteer to give me a definition? What is a single page application? Yeah, Mark.
It keeps you on a single URL. You're not having to reload the page. Keeps you in one place.
Cool. Keeps you in, what leaps you? Keeps you in one place.
Rewrites the create.
Yeah, sure. Let's just chime in now. Thank you, Mark. First of all, thank you. Great starting point here. Yeah, chime in. I heard over here.
Rewrites the page without refreshing. Bringing you to a new page.
Can't type. Rewrites page. Jeez, struggle is real. Rewrites page. Sorry, finish that thought again. Without reloading.
Another page.
Yeah, without reloading / sending you to another page. Man, my fingers aren't warmed up, I guess. Over here. Yeah, so let's say create slash renders dynamically. Did I hear something from the back? Yes, dynamically and conditionally. I love that. Cool. Anything else? Hmm. Cool. Nice. So long, yeah, I like that a lot. Longer first load, really. Let's just capitalize that. Really fast from there. Usually, there's always conditions, right? If you write terrible code in a front end framework, it's not going to magically make your code amazing. So if you write horribly inefficient code with a framework, it's still going to be horribly inefficient code. But generally speaking, this first load might be a little longer, but then we can navigate really quickly and with like a really snappy user experience, user interface. So we kind of touched on some of the why there in what is it. I want to add, and I think that this comes from the wiki here. So this line right here, this approach avoids interruption of the user experience between successive pages, making the application behave more like a desktop app, or in modern times, like a native mobile app, right? So part of the benefit of what we're doing is sort of hijacking the traditional browser experience and making it more like an actual app that you've downloaded onto your computer or that you've downloaded onto your phone, right? Those apps all have a longer first load, especially the first time you download it, right? It kind of sucks, actually. But then every other time you open that app, it's pretty snappy, right? Because it has a lot kind of ready to go after that first load. So this is pretty similar. I'm just gonna say like simulate a desktop, or I'm gonna say simulate a native experience, and we'll capitalize that. Desktop slash phone.
When you say subsequent times it has things ready to load, are you more specifically talking about is it a caching method it uses, or like when I pull it up a second time when stuff loads up quicker, is it caching specifically? Or?
So the question is about caching and second experience and stuff like that. So with the advent of progressive web apps, which are very new now, you get more of that caching functionality. Initially, I would refer more to like first time you load the page. So second time you visit the page might not be quite as good, but your browser is going to cache some things. And with progressive web apps, we're even closer to a web experience being like a native experience because there's better caching. There's even like offline caching of data requests. So like you can have functionality with a progressive web app where you edit some part of the app with a form, but you're not even connected to the internet, and it'll just wait till the next time you can connect and then kind of sync up. So progressive web apps are taking us even closer, combined with front-end frameworks, to kind of almost not needing mobile apps or not needing native apps anymore. That's getting into like a philosophical topic where some devs will be like, native apps are never going away. I personally am inclined to think that native apps are going to go away, and probably sooner rather than later. And every device is just going to be a screen to access the web. Not everybody feels that way. I do think we're headed in that direction, and front-end frameworks, progressive web apps are definitely moving us towards that, for those who want that. Good question. Any other questions or any other things to add? Actually, let's do a couple more things to add why we use them. Why do we use them? Cool. I like that. I'm gonna add what is being displayed and what's being updated. This is one of the benefits of front-end frameworks is basically we're offloading a lot of the heavy lifting of manipulating the DOM in particular to the framework. This is also kind of a drawback potentially because we have to make this paradigm shift in our thinking. Once we get there, it's amazing. Like even for a really simple app, I probably would use a front-end framework these days just because I've gotten pretty fluent with them, and they really can speed up your development process and make it so that you're worrying about data now rather than worrying about accessing the DOM directly. And that goes into what gets updated. So a framework like React is going to compare sort of React's internal view of the DOM. It's called the virtual DOM. And then compare any changes that happen in data between the virtual DOM and the real DOM. And if there are changes, then re-render. But don't re-render the whole page, because that's what we're getting away from. Just re-render this little piece of the page or of the app that has received some new data or has been changed in some way. Sweet. Yes, yes. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned it. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
How do you mean?
What do you mean by modular?
So you can control the pieces individually and move them around, and like we were kind of touched on that when things are being updated and displayed, you don't have to do the entire page, just that like little module that you're working with.
Nice. Cool. And do you know what the term that we use for front-end frameworks is when we talk about modularity? Yes, components. Components. We're gonna talk a lot more about components. We're gonna give you a brief quick hit today and talk about them a lot more tomorrow, most likely. But exactly right. Like we think about our page as a collection of small pieces that go together, perhaps with some wrapper that's sort of controlling them. That's sort of the brain. And React is really more of the view part of the MVC, for those of you who went to that breakout or have some knowledge of it. But we can add on more pieces to it with routing and state management and like Redux and stuff like that to make it more of a fully fledged, not quite MVC, but close to it, sort of a modern interpretation of that. All right, cool. We've been talking for long enough. Let's dive into it. So you can follow along with me during this part if you'd like. You do not have to. Everything that we do today, I'm going to put on GitHub, and then next time, tomorrow, everyone can just pull that, and we'll all have the same starting point. But feel free to follow along if you want to get some of this under your fingers. So I'm just in my breakouts folder. I've got a few other things there, and I'm going to use the create React app script to generate my first, well, not my first, your first React app. So we'll do npx. So you can do an npm install -g of create React app. It's a tool kind of like Light Server that lets you run that command. You don't have to though. I already have it, but even if you don't have it, let me zoom this in a little bit. If you do npx, so it'll just run the script, create React app, and then this is key. You need sort of like an argument. So the next thing is going to be the name of your app and the name of the folder. Yeah, Jeff.
What is the difference between npm and npx?
So npm is for, in this case, the difference is that if you didn't already have create React app installed globally, you wouldn't have access to this command. Since I have it globally, I can just use it like this. npx sort of like temporarily installs the create React app script and then executes it. So npx, if you see like npx Cypress run, it's like installing a temporary version of Cypress, running it, and then getting rid of it. So it's not keeping it on your machine.
So if we drop our machine, come back to the same file, it's not going to be there?
So anything you generated with it will be fine. You just wouldn't be able to execute the script on its own.
Oh, so if we did npx, then tomorrow we tried to do an npm start, it wouldn't work?
No, npm start and whatnot would work. If you wanted to create another React app, you would need to use npx again. We can talk more about it. In any case, for right now, let's do npx create React app, and I'm going to call this React Introduction 2, because I already have a folder in here named React Introduction. So this is fortunately not going to take too long, but you can see here it's installing some dependent packages: React, React DOM, React scripts. The scripts are what let us do like npm start, etc. Once this is finished running, we're actually going to have a React app. Some of you may have already done this. And let's see, it's about to finish up. So here we go now. Sweet, happy hacking. So now if we do ls, we see we have React Introduction 2 here. So we've generated our first React app. It's actually super straightforward. It's nice to do things through the CLI tool because the short of it, and we could talk a lot about pros and cons of using the tool, but this is an official tool that Facebook provided, and it basically lets us get up and going quickly. It is hiding some configuration from us that we can get access to if we want to, but at the beginning when you're learning React, you don't want to be fighting with how to wire things up and where to like choose your entry point into the DOM and stuff like that. We just want to write some code, right? We want to get exposed to React. So this should do the trick. So let's open this up. And actually the first thing that I'm going to do is get back over to Slack and grab these notes and paste them in the README. So it comes with like a ton of stuff in the README that is just kind of like bootstrapped code. Let's get that, and let's get our objectives as well. There we go. Where is it? Here we go. All right, sweet. Cool. Now we can be a little more organized here. I'm lost without Markdown. Sweet. So we described single page apps. We have generated a React application. It was pretty straightforward, right? Let's talk a little bit about the file structure now. Yes?
Sorry, quick question. Like, I noticed the React CLI installs and utilizes both NPM and Yarn. I've been using NPM just because that's what I use just about everything else, but they don't seem to do everything the same. Like, they seem to maybe do a couple things differently or whatever. Are there scenarios where you would want to use Yarn, or do you just like stick with NPM?
So that's a really good question. The question is about like NPM versus Yarn. The bottom line is that they're both doing pretty much the same things. Yarn is just sort of Facebook's version of NPM, if you will. There was a time not long ago where Yarn was a lot faster than NPM, and so I actually temporarily sort of switched to using Yarn, not just for React projects, for everything. NPM is sort of caught up in the speed game, so I'm kind of back to NPM. The bottom line is whichever you choose, stick with it for that project. And you can switch even between projects, but like if you're using Yarn for this one, I'm going to use NPM. But if you're using Yarn, use Yarn. If you're using NPM, use NPM. Once you start mixing them within the same project, that's when it gets weird. Cool, good question. Any other questions before we dive into file structure here? All right, cool. So one of the first things you notice here is that there's more going on, perhaps, than other apps that you've built. Probably than most, if not all, apps that you've built. So it's important to have some base understanding of what's going on, why things are structured this way, what do I need to worry about, and what can I ignore, basically. So a few crucial things. App.js, let me zoom this out a little bit. So App.js is sort of going to be where you're doing sort of like your entry point into your actual app. This is where you're going to be doing the bulk of your work, at least at the start, before you start making more components. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that's the case. Actually, I'll tell you what, if you're following along, let's go over to the CLI, and if you run npm start, first of all, where is this going to look in my folder structure to execute the start script? Yes, package.json. So let's check that out really quickly. Zoom this in a bit. So we saw when we ran the install, it said it was like installing some of these, whoa, a lot of dependencies. But this React scripts here, React DOM, React is sort of the core library. React DOM lets us attach an entry point to render things to the actual DOM. And then the React scripts are basically just tooling to let us get our app going. So when we run npm start, it executes this start script. We can build, that's when we're ready for production, ready to deploy basically. Test and eject. Eject is how you get more of that configuration option. Stay away from that for right now. And I don't really use the test command that much either. You could put your custom tests in there if you wanted to. So we'll run npm start, And it's going to take a minute again because it's building up this application. It's taking these many files that we have here and essentially bundling them together, uglifying the code, so squishing the code all together and creating sort of like a regular page that we can render. Yeah, question?
So if we type npm start and it's reading this file, is that the same as typing npm react scripts start?
It would actually be the same as just typing React script start. So when you do npm start, it's basically like a proxy or an alias for this actual command. And I think if we scroll, oh, hello? Well, for some reason I can't scroll here.
That's because it's running.
Yeah, still, I think I cleared out the command history before I ran it. In any case, yeah, it's just executing this actual script right here. So you could type that directly if you wanted to. So we see now we have a React app. It's that easy to actually get a basic app going. What we're going to work on today is splitting what we have here into some components to learn a little bit about why we want to do that in the first place. And tomorrow we're going to dive a little more deeper into the concepts of components and state and props and different types of components. So let's get back to the file structure though for a minute. I mentioned that app.js is sort of the heart of things for the most part. But let's talk about some of these other files. So first thing, we have a public folder and we have a source src, which is short for source folder. And then just some basic stuff like a git ignore, a package.json, a readme, basic stuff for any application and certainly any back-end application. Public, basically don't touch these files. You don't really need the favicon. I'm actually not even sure what the manifest JSON's doing. But the index, so you don't want to edit this file, but I want to point out that this is basically just setting up sort of the shell of your application. So if we scroll down here, there's some meta information. We've got the title, so that's what actually displays in our browser as the title. And then the body is pretty much empty, aside from this div with the ID of root, right? So this is essentially identifying the entry point of our application through React into a more traditional HTML page, right? So we have this shell, and then we're sort of injecting our app in there. And although app.js is sort of your main starting point, the actual true starting point is index.js. So you don't need to touch the code in index.js, but I want to show you really quickly what's going on. It's bringing in React, as all of your components will need to. That's how the library functions. It's also bringing in React DOM. We saw that as a dependency when the create React app script was run. And this is basically just some CSS. Make some comments. Some CSS. Not like super crucial. This line here is really, really crucial. So this imports our application, or our app component, so it can be rendered. So this line's crucial. All index is doing is coordinating app.js as the heart of your app, basically. So it imports app from /app. That's literally just the current folder /app. You can leave off the JS. It's just bringing in the file. Yeah, Jeff.
So is index.js the only JavaScript file within index.html?
Yeah, I believe so. Oh, it's not even, actually. It's essentially like React is handling pumping it in. We don't need to link scripts in a traditional way. That's a good question though. It's using this like React DOM part of it. So let's walk through index. We bring in our app component, so we have it ready to go. And then this service worker is for some of that progressive web app stuff. We can basically ignore that for right now. But this React DOM.render, it's saying render this app component. This is how we can reference it. It looks almost like HTML, right? This is what's called JSX. So render this component and all of the stuff that it contains, whether that be many more components down the line. Right now it's pretty basic. And attach it to, I mean, this is pretty traditional syntax, right? You're used to this, vanilla JS. document.getElement by ID root. So it's looking at the index.html page, finding the div with the ID of root. It's really the only thing on the page, and rendering this app component there. So I want to track a small component hierarchy as we go through this. So let's visualize what's going on here. I've got this web app called Lucidchart. I use it more for like data modeling, like back-end stuff, but we can do some simple shapes and whatnot. So I'm going to drag an octagon out here. This is a stop sign, basically, meaning don't touch this file. This is our, actually it's not capitalized. This is our index.js file. So again, all this is really doing, zoom this a little bit, is coordinating render the app starting at the div with the ID of root. So this actually is technically kind of the top of our component hierarchy. Component hierarchy is a tree structure, just like the DOM itself. So index is going to render app.js, and I'm doing a heart for this because this really is the heart of the application. So index renders app.js. Oops. And right now, that's the whole hierarchy. So index renders app, and if we look at app, there's a lot of syntax that might be a little confusing. The bottom line is it's just returning some HTML to pump into the page. So this is what we're seeing. We see this image with the logo, this spinning thing. We see an H1 that says welcome to React, and then we see a little paragraph that says to get started, edit, etc. Basically just HTML right now with some CSS on top of it. Any questions on what's happening in the file structure with index and app and like what's orienting yourself? Yes.
I did edit the index.html just to change the title.
That's fine. Yeah, that's totally fine. I more mean like, yeah, it's okay if you want to tweak stuff in there, and like when we get to routing, we may actually touch that file, but it's generally speaking more of just a coordinating file where you wouldn't write a ton of logic in there. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So node modules you're going to get real comfortable with because when you write back-end code, you're going to be using node modules all the time. So what React is doing for us here is kind of letting us run almost like server code on the front end using Node. So Node is what enables JavaScript to run on the back end. JavaScript traditionally just a browser technology. And front-end frameworks leverage that to actually run code with different modules, which are sort of like this app needs all this stuff to run. These are all, in fact, there's quite a lot of them. These are all like little packages, little pieces of functionality. Sometimes they're interdependent, but these are all of the extra files and stuff like that this application needs to run, which is a ton of stuff. And you'll see this in back-end code. You'll see a node modules file. The bottom line is you never want to touch stuff in there. This is all stuff that generally gets generated from the package.json. You see we've got this section of dependencies. Package.json, just a JSON object. We've got these dependencies, React, React DOM, React scripts. So these all have individual dependencies, and that's sort of what's comprising the node modules. So it's always going to be an intimidatingly large amount of stuff. You really mostly need to worry about what your actual dependencies are in your in your package.json. So like if we were to then go and add routing into this, we would do an npm install React router, and I think it's React router DOM is the actual name of the package. So we're installing a package through Node, through npm, and then it would install any dependencies that package needs in the node modules. Another good question.
So then it would update the package.json.
Yep, we would see a line here, something like, React router DOM, and then a version. This second part's a version number. You basically don't want to edit your package. You never want to edit the dependencies part directly. basically, this is kind of tracking stuff you've added to the app through the CLI. But yeah, and node, the bottom line with node modules is that they're just a collection of stuff the app needs. And other than that, we can basically ignore it. And in fact, if you look at the git ignore, the first thing that it's ignoring is the node modules, because we don't need to be pushing up and down all that stuff. If someone else wants to use our app, they can clone it, or fork and clone it, and then if they run npm install, that's what creates this folder with all the dependencies. Sweet. All right, cool. So we have our entry point to the app through index. Okay, get out of here. Have I broken the app? No, it's still running. Also, when you run your app through like npm start or yarn start, it should hot reload. So it should refresh when you make changes. So if, say, I go to my app.js file and I say, welcome to front-end frameworks, save it, come back here, boom, it refreshes and we get that update. Kind of like Light Server, but for your React app. Super handy. So let's look at app.js now. So this is sort of, like I said, the heart of the app, or the brain of the app, maybe in a different metaphor. And let's just go through what's happening here. So we have our basic imports. These are just bringing in libraries, bringing in some of the stuff in node modules so that we can use it. Importing this logo that's just being pumped in as the source, basically this thing. So that's not like necessary, right? If I delete that, actually it might yell at me, logo's undefined, yeah. That's another thing. React gives you pretty nice like error messaging and stuff like that. Like this is identifying very clearly. Line 10, logo's not defined. In fact, if I click on it, does it take me over? It does. That's really cool. I've actually never done that before. Cool. So that's breaking because I've temporarily removed a variable, basically. And then, again, this is CSS for the entire application. There are lots of ways to handle doing CSS in React. You can do it on a per component basis. That's getting a little beyond the complexity of what I want to cover in this series. So as far as you're concerned, you can write all your CSS in app.css. It comes with some basic stuff, like just a little bit, because it comes with some classes out of the box. These are just matching to the classes we see in app.js to give it this basic styling. So that's where you write your CSS, and it gets imported here. It then applies for app.js and anything beneath app.js in the hierarchy. And then we get to this class syntax here. So again, we'll dive more into class components versus functional components and when to use which as we go on here. But for right now, app.js is always generated as a class component, and you want it to be a class component. So a class, again, without getting too nitty-gritty with it, a class is basically like a special object. So that's part of why we see this kind of syntax. And what we're doing here is we're extending component. That component comes from here. So when we import React, we also import part of React. So this is using destructuring. This is the equivalent of React.component. If you think of React as almost like its own special object, we have a bunch of other classes inside of React, a bunch of other objects basically inside of React. We have those objects have functions attached to them, have attributes attached to them. It's basically like a big object, kind of like an event object or a DOM node object. There's like tons and tons of properties, right? This is just taking advantage of some destructuring syntax to pull the component out and call it component. So this code should still work if we change this to React.component. Yeah, nothing breaks. Cool. So I just wanted to explain that real quick because I've gotten a lot of questions like, what's the deal with this? So we're extending the base React component, and I mentioned classes are like special objects in that they can be like extended, which is kind of like, let's make a copy of it. Let's make a copy of it, and then we're going to customize it. You need to extend the base component because it comes with all sorts of methods and functionality attached to it. So for now, app.js is always a class component. extending the base React.component class. Cool. And then the key stuff in here is, since it's a class, it needs a render function. And this is just telling React, like, what does this component actually return? React is an interesting mix of some object-oriented principles and some functional programming principles. Functional programming principles in this case are mostly like, our components take some stuff in and spit some stuff out. And if you always give them the same stuff, they'll always spit the same stuff out. If you change the stuff they're given, if you change the data that they're given, then they'll spit out something different. And like practically speaking, you can treat what's going on inside of this render function, inside of this return, as basically HTML with the ability to pump valid JavaScript in. So we have image source equals logo. It's basically just pulling this string right here and pumping it in as the source. So if we were to change this, I think this will still work. Let's see. So we're no longer using this line. We go back here, and it still works. So even though some of this syntax looks different, these imports and whatnot, it's really just JavaScript. This is kind of similar to doing like const logo equals this string. And then the way we do the templating in React is we declare, hey, there's going to be JavaScript in here. So we do these curly braces, almost like you're inside of like a function, or if you're familiar with template literals, kind of like you're using a template literal. So like template $, and now you can put like a variable in there, or like that's usually how you use template literals. So. Yes, this gets into how you bind data as well, totally. And we're going to cover that a lot more. It obviously doesn't like this template literal that I'm using here, but if we take this back, actually, if we were to move that template literal inside of here, it should work. So any valid JavaScript can go in here. You can do math, you can run functions. Yeah, see, now it'll work. The syntax looks really weird, but oh, no. No, there's no reason to do that. I'm just playing around with examples. But if we refactor this to bring in the logo, will it work? Yeah, it's back to working. No, it's not. Line 6. Oh, I think I just need to move it down here. There we go. Logo doesn't look so hot, but yeah, it's pulling in like the whole file. Anyway, let's move on from that. The key thing is that if you need to pump in some JavaScript, you can do that. You can template it with just opening some curly braces. So you'll see this a lot, especially with passing props and stuff like that. But you could potentially do some logic in here also. You can also, if you want to, you can do some logic outside the return, but inside the render. So you can potentially do a bunch of logic in here, like a more solid example might be like const title equals hello world. So now we have a constant available within the scope of this function, right? It's just a function that's returning, in this case, basically HTML. And instead of doing welcome to Fefs, we could open up some curlies in here, and we could template in the title, because it's just a reference to a variable. And we should see the title changing. There we go. Hello world. So JSX can look a little intimidating. It's just this combination, like what is this HTML doing in my JavaScript? It's just a combination of HTML and the ability to pump in whatever you want or need to. Oftentimes data, say from an API. Cool. Any questions on sort of like the basics of what's happening in this component. What's going on with this return? What's the deal with the render method? Perhaps this class extends syntax.
Can you go back to the actual app for a second?
Yeah,
Okay, can you go back to that?
sure.
Where is L1? Oh, right there.
So yeah, it's yep, cool. Just a variable I made and then templated in there.
In most cases, wouldn't you declare like your constant stuff in like a header component or whatever, and then just pass through like to minimize like the amount of variables and stuff you're
Yeah.
like you break that component, not just make it a little more modular. In most cases,
Yeah, so you're describing more of like what we'd be doing when we're using state and props. You probably aren't going to have a ton of things going on above the return of your render, or in the case of a functional component, which is just a function that returns JSX, doesn't have this class syntax, then you would just, yeah, you'd most likely just be working with props and state. This is sort of like simulating this receiving something from props for right now. Cool. And we'll get into props a little bit in the next 13 minutes, hopefully. So, yeah, question.
Can you have JavaScript above the render? Can you declare that constant above the render?
So you can't because we're inside of like an object, basically. We're inside of a class, and we're going to get an error if we do this. This is not, this space right here isn't just like a regular code block because we're not inside of like a function. What we can do, and what we will do as we go forward, is write other functions that do something and then reuse them in the somewhere in the template often.
You can write certain JavaScript up there, just not a constant by itself.
Right. It'd be like declaring an object. It'd be like just, doing like const my object equals an object and then doing const title equals something. Like that's just not how objects work. They're key value pairs, right? So if we wanted to have a constant that, we would have to do something like title and then put the title here. Similar kind of rules for classes. But we can declare lots of functions or methods and write code there. For right now, I'm just going to move this back down inside the render function.
So is there a key value pair then within that object that you're making a class extends component?
So this is,
Render the key.
yeah, render is essentially the key. Yep. Yep.
Your computer's running that.
What?
Your computer's
I see that.
Okay, I don't know.
Does anyone have a charger I could use? Thank you. You're the man. Came prepared.
so below return where it says class name app, that's probably app.
That-
All your user, and that's like where the page, like the whole app begins. So that's why if you put any JavaScript or like a variable outside of that render, it's just like essentially like not in there anymore. It's like outside of it.
Yeah, I mean, you're breaking the rules of JavaScript if you do that. That's the bottom line. Let's not get too hung up on this because we're not going to be doing a whole lot of work like this anyways. So let's check back to our objectives. So let's talk now about componentization. So got this section of the React docs that I think does a pretty good job. It gives you like a quick hit. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that page. And I think some of this is stuff you guys already know. But let's do just real quick, let's just do like 1 minute to read this section right here. There's not much. You can get into functional and class components, but don't worry about them too much right now. Let's just do 1 minute to read, and then we can have a quick discussion, and then I want to show you how to refactor at least part of this page into a component. About 10 seconds left. All right, I'm gonna stop that. So let's quickly get some consensus on components. So I'm gonna move this stuff. I'm gonna make a notes section. So talk about some of the benefits of componentization. What I'd like to do is just take a volunteer from each table to give me like one hit on why components. We'll just start with this table here. Who's got a thought? Yeah, Danny.
This is where the module kind of comes in, where it's modular, and it's kind of a way to organize individual pieces of the page
Cool.
into
Helps.
their own separate kind of components.
Yeah, individual pieces of the page
Or
into
app.
their own. Yeah, of the page slash. Let's just call it app actually. Into their own place, sort of. All right, back left table. What do we got for a benefit? Yeah.
Components are usually extremely reusable.
Yes. That's a huge one. Extremely reusable. And that's one of the biggest benefits. Back right table.
Is he gonna control like or prevent state conflicts when you're passing through like state and props, like prevent two components from like bumping into each other, trying to use a more control over how the DOMs be rendered and your states be rendered.
Cool. I'm gonna sort of reword that. Say we can control state in one place slash few places. State for now, just think of state as the data that's available to the app. Oftentimes like arrays of objects, right? So we can control the state in one place or a few places and pass it around as needed. So we can have a component that only needs one piece of the state to work, just takes that in and renders it out. And other parts of the app may need a different piece of state. So as much as possible, we just control state in one place, typically app.js, and then we pass each individual component, however like high or low it is in the hierarchy, just whatever it needs to function. So if this were not our app.js, like if this were a component that just needed a title, then all that component needs is the title from state. And it can do its thing. It can render a header with a title. That's kind of the idea. Nice. And then this table?
They all did a great job. I was gonna say reusable. That's just what I was thinking.
Cool. Let's hit reusable again. So I'm going to say component only receives what it needs to function, and not more. Cool. So the reusability is one of the biggest benefits of front-end frameworks, period. Sometimes learning a front-end framework, like some of the drawbacks, right? It can be a steep learning curve, and it depends on the framework, right? You don't just learn React and you automatically know Angular also. These are some of the potential drawbacks and why sometimes people even now choose not to use a framework, especially if it's not a super, super complex app. But as your app grows in size, and I'll show you a quick hit of this reusability before we go today, as our apps grow in size, or if it's a large company like Facebook or Nordstrom who's in this building, we probably want reusability and consistency. So I'm going to add extremely consistent. Consistency. C. If we write one really good button component, and maybe its color can be changed based on a string like red or blue or green that's passed into it, kind of like if you think of CSS frameworks. And all that button needs is the text to display and maybe a function to call when the button gets pressed. You can write the code for that button, and if it's good, if it's a good component, anyone else in the whole company can now reuse that component. So we're going to be making most of our components from scratch, but so we may not be benefiting quite as much from this total reusability. But if you want consistency, and if you want to reuse code, because right, a button is super simple. Maybe it's a component that does a lot more. We just bring in that component into our program or our part of the app, and then we just pass it whatever it needs to function, and boom, it works. Very nice. This is a pretty good list. Yeah, let's move on. Let's write an actual component. Again, you can follow along. You don't have to. We'll all have the same starting point tomorrow. So what we're going to do, and this isn't going to be super exciting, but we're going to refactor this code. Okay, we're going to reopen Chrome. We're going to refactor the code that is basically rendering this page, but we're going to make it componentized, so it's going to be super reusable. We'll just wait for that to load up. So what I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do, the most obvious components here to me, and some of your componentization is up to you, but the most obvious ones to me are the header, which is this whole section right here, this hello world, and then this paragraph essentially right here, or text that comes below. So right now it's pretty static, right? We just have our app.js component. So first thing, and it's kind of unfortunate, but React is super flexible. You can structure however you want, but I'm going to make a folder called components. I'm going to try to, I'll probably like 305-ish. What do we have next?
I'm trying to figure out which class I'm going to adopt the fundamental thing. Two's no good apparently because lightning talks, but
Oh.
whatever.
All right, I'll wrap up quickly. So we'll make a components folder just because this is a nice way to organize things. And then within the components folder, I'm going to make a file called header.js. Note that I have it capitalized. This is actually really important. React can get confused if you don't capitalize your components. So just roll with that. That's the convention. And then this is going to be a little different than the app.js component, but we are going to need, not the logo. Actually, we are going to need the logo. So let's pull in these two imports. Normally you wouldn't need the logo, but since this component is going to use it, we'll bring it in. And then this is just going to be a functional component. So class component can do a lot more work. Functional component just takes in some code and takes in some properties, spits out some JSX. So the way to write that, we'll do const, let's call it header, capital H again, equals, we're using some ES6 syntax, equals a function, right? Just function, fat arrow, open it up, and now this is basically just a function that's just going to return JSX. So let's pull what it needs to render right out of app.js. So get rid of title here and change this back to just saying hello world in a string here. And the header is going to be everything from header tag to header tag. So I'm literally just going to cut that right out. We go back to the app, hard refresh, boom, we've lost the header, but it's coming back. It's coming back. So if we go back to header.js, and I'm going to add a return statement. Again, we're just inside a function. And when you need a multi-line return in JavaScript, you can use the parentheses. So we'll open up a set of parentheses, make some empty space, and then we can just paste that code right in. Just pulled it right from app.js, didn't change a thing. We'll need to change the path of the logo because we're now inside of a components folder. So we'll just change that to whoa, too many dots. / logo. So now it's jumping out of components to source and finding this logo file. With me so far? Awesome. Actually, well, okay, really crucial final step here. We have set this function up, but we need to export it so that the rest of the application can bring it in wherever it's needed. So we do at the bottom. You may see it differently in documentation. I always like to put it at the bottom, so I'm kind of like crossing my T's and dotting my I's as I go. Do export default, which is just saying this is the only thing that this part of the app is exporting, and then the name. So you can just copy it right there, export default header. So we just set up a function, we export it, and now we still have nothing, right? Because we're not rendering it anywhere. But if we go back to app.js, we can now import it. We can get rid of this logo line because now the logo is self-contained to the header component. And we'll make some space for importing components. And I like to put all my component imports sort of as the last thing before rendering. That's just style. So we'll do import header from, and then we need a path. So dot slash components slash capital H header. Doesn't matter what you call it. Well, this needs to be a reference to the file. This part, it doesn't technically matter what you call it after the import. I like to shadow like the names. So, yeah.
So let's say we had multiple components in our header, and we were exporting multiple ones, kind of like React is get multiple components in React.
Yeah.
Would you have a default then? And would the naming then matter? What you're naming it as an import?
So I like to keep it one component to a file. So I would create another file if I had another component.
Or if you had a utilities file, multiple things.
Yeah, you can leave off the default, and you can export. You can export multiple things from one file. Yeah.
But if you were exporting multiple and had a default, then would that come in if you just referenced it without something?
I think when you specify default, it only exports the one thing. Could be wrong on that though. I'll have to look it up. Cool. So we have our header. We now have a reference to it. I have a plugin that's indicating that this isn't being used. That's why it's grayed out. So to get back to where we were, all we have to do now is basically set up an HTML. Let me zoom this. Basically just set up almost like this component was an HTML tag. So if I spell it right, that would be helpful. So opening caret, the name of the component, which is a reference to the actual text here, and then close it off. And you'll notice a convention where like some space is left. That's just a convention. It'll work just fine if you do it like that. But almost like we're writing a div tag, right? And so now, since our header component exports or is a function that returns all this stuff, we're just going to end up with, we should be back to where we started actually. Come on, hard refresh. Sometimes the hot reloading doesn't work that well. Boom. And now we're back where we started, but we've now refactored into a component. Cool, very cool. That's a lot of stuff, a lot of steps. Any questions on the basics of sort of extracting pre-existing code into a component and then rendering it? Give you some time to think about it. Just do a few more seconds to think. All right, yeah, Josh.
I've already noticed, like, I've run into situations where there's some modules, dependencies, and stuff that would be helpful to know, like Webpack, stuff like that, that's involved, like errors that might come up. Are there any you can tell us, like, here are 3 dependencies? If you read just a little documentation, it'll save you a lot of heartache.
That's a good question. I will say, just in general, the React docs are actually very good. In terms of like something common that might pop up, I'm failing to come up with anything off the top of my head. Learning Webpack is great. That's more like when you want to take things to another level. Webpack is basically what's one of the things that's being hidden from us when we use Create React App. Like, hey, I don't want to worry about the build configuration. So definitely feel free to look into that. That's going to be a little outside the scope of this series. I find that usually the messages are pretty good, but sometimes it can be hard to track things down for sure. I'll get back to you on that one. Cool. Any other questions on extracting here? Okay, cool. I want to show you a couple more things and then we'll get out of here. Sorry we're running long. So I'm going to extract this paragraph into another component. So I'm just going to actually what I'm going to do first, I'm going to make a new file in here. We'll call it paragraph.js. And then since this is going to be such a similar component, it's just another functional component, I am going to just copy what I had in header, paste it in there, get rid of the logo, and change the name to paragraph. So that's what's being exported and imported, paragraph. No, this is it, and then I'm out. Yeah. And let's now cut out the paragraph. And we'll paste that right into this component. Spacing's a little weird there. We now need to, what's the next step if we want to get this rendering on the page again? Import it. Yeah, let's import it. And I'm just going to copy this line, select these two things, change that to paragraph. And now we can render the paragraph as well. Cool. We go back to our app, hard refresh, and again, we're back to our starting point. So now, right now, it seems like we've done a lot of work for not a lot of payoff, right? But here's the beautiful thing in a nutshell about this reusability piece. We can now, if we want many paragraphs, just copy those. If we wanted another header at the bottom for some reason, we can copy that. We go back to our app, and now we have a lot more stuff going on. Granted, it's not super dynamic, right? But once we get into props, we can change the props here, and like magic, we've got a lot more stuff going on. Did I see a hand back there? Oh, I just thought I saw a hand for a question. Oops. Cool. Final thing before you go. Quick hit on props, and we're going to cover props in depth next time. So props are just an object or data that this function is receiving, or that this component's receiving. So if we set this to receive props, we're going to make a prop called title. And in our templating, right, where we're rendering stuff, we can do props.title. Because props is an object, it'll receive the title. So now if we go back to app.js, when we render the header, we can give it a different title, just like it's an HTML attribute. So if we do hello world here, and then we change the title on this last one to goodbye world, go back to our page, and now, once we refresh, now we've got some dynamic stuff going on with props. So if we added content or something like that to the paragraph props, we can change that. I'm good, Sean. Cool. So that's a wrap. We'll pick up tomorrow where we left off. And thanks so much, and sorry for running overtime.
Thanks, Matt.
You got it. I'll get all this code on GitHub as well.